At Mass this Sunday we hear the Gospel from St. John, who tells us of the risen Jesus going to the upper room to meet his apostles after his resurrection. And it's quite a famous story because one of the 12, St. Thomas the Apostle, was not with the others when Jesus appeared. And when he comes back later that day, his friends, the apostles, tell him that we have seen the risen Lord, and Thomas famously doubts that Jesus has risen from the dead. And he doesn't just doubt, he says that unless he can see the very wounds in Jesus' hands from the nails of the cross, and not only see them, unless he can touch and put his finger into those wounds and put his hand into the side of Jesus, unless he can do all of that, he refuses to believe. And since then, Thomas has always been called Doubting Thomas. But I've always got a bit of sympathy for St. Thomas, because really what he's saying is, unless I know that Jesus is truly risen from the dead, unless I can experience that by seeing him and touching him, then I refuse to believe. And that is fundamental for our Catholic faith. Because in Jesus rising from the dead, it's not something spiritual, it's not something symbolic or metaphorical, it is real. Jesus rises from the dead, really and truly. Body and blood, soul and divinity. The same Jesus Christ who died for us on the cross on Good Friday rises to new life on Easter Sunday. And that's what St. Thomas needs the proof of before he'll believe. And he's right. And we see a sign of that proof that Jesus is truly risen from the dead in the change that takes place in the apostles themselves. If you think about it, it's the same apostles that he appears to in that upper room, the same men who abandoned Jesus in Gethsemane, who ran away in our Lord's darkest hour. And famously, St. Peter, we all know the story, denied Jesus 3 times, even knowing who Jesus was. The same Peter who was hiding outside in the dark by the fire, skulking about, trying not to be noticed, questioned by a servant girl and saying that he didn't even know Jesus. That same St. Peter now stands up in the temple, the centre of the Jewish faith, in broad daylight, before the chief priests and the scribes and the elders, and says that Jesus Christ is truly risen, and that by his cross and resurrection we are redeemed. We see that transformation in all of the apostles. St. Thomas, who doubted so much, tradition tells us, went all the way to India to spread the gospel. He travelled furthest. And we see that transformation in Thomas in the gospel this Sunday. He goes from doubting entirely to making the boldest, most profound profession of faith that any of the apostles give in the gospels, when he says to Jesus, "My Lord and my God." In these days of Easter, we too need to be transformed by the Lord's resurrection, because the resurrection changes everything. In the midst of our lives, and whatever pains and sufferings we endure, or those around us endure, our families, our friends, even in death, everything changes in the resurrection of Jesus. Christ is truly alive, and we must experience the power of his resurrection in our lives and be transformed like the apostles, like the disciples, and to bear witness to that in our lives, to bring that into a world that is so desperately in need of that saving message of Christ, that he not only died for us in love of us, he also rose from the dead in love for each one of us.